His background. Okay. Subpoint A. Just like his name, excuse me, just as his name is accusatory, comma, so also his background is informative. He is introduced to us in 1 Kings 17:1 as, quote, Elijah the Tishbite, period, end quote. Yep, Tishbite, Tishbite. From Tishbe. There is no background data concerning his family, his status, etc. Was he poor, comma, wealthy, comma, educated or uneducated, etc. Question mark. This at first seems to be lacking information rather than being informative. Remember my first sentence said his background is informative. Doesn't sound very informative. This at first seems to be lacking information rather than being informative until you consider it from a doctrinal perspective. So what you always have to look at is obviously look at the information, make sure you're in fellowship, look at the information from a doctrinal perspective. And what you realize when you look at things from a doctrinal perspective, and the habit we get into and the process that we get into, the way we study is not only what is said, okay, but what isn't said. Right? We look all the time at things that are said, how they're said. For example, when we were looking at James, we saw that James could have said, and it rained. Okay? But he didn't, right? He said he brought forth the rain. It rained, right? So we understand the difference between the way things are said, okay, as well as things that aren't said, okay? And here's something that isn't said. Let's continue. Let's look at this, okay? So until you consider it from a doctrinal perspective. Here, comma, here, what we have is a mature or super grace believer who has the gift of communication and has come to Ahab at the command of God. The fact that there is no background information, so the fact that there is no background information tells us that it is unimportant to a mature believer what his background or environment are. Environment, comma, family, comma, wealth, comma, education, comma, mean nothing to a believer who is mature and has a soul full of doctrine, period. He is not a product of his environment, comma, his failures or his successes, comma, he is a product of the plan of God and the Word of God. So this, if you compare Elijah to Paul, for example, this is analogous to Paul, right? When we saw in Paul, he came from a good background, right? He states that he was very well educated. He was a Pharisee, right? He had all the right to be one of the highest Pharisees that there was. We see this in Philippians 3:4-7, where he talks about being a Pharisee of Pharisees, okay, and having everything. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, okay? He had all of these things going for him, but what does he say? He says it's not worth anything, right? In Christ, it's not worth anything. The idea being your status that you come to in Christ means absolutely nothing. What could possibly give you any kind of advantage in God's plan that you could bring with you? Nothing. Nothing except your volition, right? Your money means nothing. God can take that away just as quickly as he could give you more of it. Either way, he can control that. Your education means nothing because you operate in God's plan with a spiritual IQ. Has absolutely nothing to do with your human IQ. It's the human spirit and God the Holy Spirit indwelling in you, okay, that gives you the ability to understand doctrine and move it through. It's not because you have a certain human IQ. Jack used to say you could be 1 point above a moron, and as long as you have the ability to rub 2 brain cells together, okay, you have the ability to be the greatest believer there is because it comes from God. It's the spiritual IQ, not the human IQ. So your education means nothing. Okay, somewhere there is a pastor teacher whose right congregation, okay, have drool buckets on their desk because they're just barely above. I should say it that way. But whose ability to teach people that have no background, no education, no what? That's his right congregation, right? Just like somewhere, okay, there's a pastor teacher whose right congregation are people that speak in 17-syllable words. You know, there's probably only 3 of those, but anyway, you know what I mean. I mean, obviously being exaggerated, but your education means nothing, okay? So the background doesn't mean anything. Now, in Paul's case, we know Paul's background because what it does is it shows the great power of God to take someone who is in that kind of an environment and strip him down to nothing and then turn him out to be, you know, a magnificent believer. But here with Elijah, we don't have his background. On the back, that's very important. That's very informative to us. It tells us it doesn't matter. Okay? It doesn't matter where he comes from. The Bible didn't tell us, so don't guess. It's sort of like the book of Hebrews. It's the message, not the man. Well, it's the same thing with Elijah here. It's his doctrinal orientation. It doesn't matter where he came from in terms of his status or his parents. Oh, gee, I'm a product of a broken home. Shut up, suck it up, function properly in God's plan and get on with it, right? People from a broken home are just like people from an extremely wealthy home where nobody ever cared about them and they were raised by servants. What difference does it matter? Get in God's plan, okay? So you have a mature believer here, and it just doesn't matter, okay? Subpoint B. We also know that he was from Tishbe. Like I say, it's sometimes with an I and sometimes it's with an E, which is in the land of Gilead. This tells us that he was from the tribe of Reuben or Gad. G-A-D. Actually, it's French. There's an S and an I and a U. Reuben or Gad, who had not crossed over the Jordan. So this tells us that he was from the tribe of Reuben or Gad, who had not crossed over the Jordan. You have the half tribe of Manasseh, but they're in a different location where Tishbe is located. It wouldn't be from there. Okay, but what's interesting is with those tribes, there isn't much of a in the Bible. There is not, because it's not the promised land. Okay, they stayed out of the promised land. There's not a real good differentiation of where the boundaries are between the tribes. When you get to the promised land, you know exactly who, where Naphtali is and where, all these different other tribes are. But over here on that east, not west, on that east side, okay, it's just kind of somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay. But the two tribes that were up north like that were Gad and Reuben. Okay. Okay, who had not crossed over the Jordan. Most likely, comma, given his nature and his attitude, comma, he was from the tribe of Reuben, semicolon. The tribe that had lost its inheritance. And stayed on that side of the river for the grazing land, period. See, Reuben malfunctioned and his inheritance went to his brother, okay? And so the Reubenites didn't have any inheritance. So when they got to this area, okay, they looked at this and said, we like this area better than that area, and since we don't have an inheritance, let us stay over here, okay? But I'm going to give you a little bit of reason why I said river for the grazing land. So continuing the point. The Reubenites, that's R-E-U-B-E-N, and then add I-T-E-S. So the Reubenites were herdsmen of Israel. And took care of the cattle and the sheep during the Exodus. Now, think about the millions of people that came out in the Exodus, right? They all had to eat. Okay, they had food provided for them. Remember the manna, but they also had animals, right? Then they had to do sacrifices and they had to do all those kinds of things, right? So you can imagine how many cattle and how many sheep 5 million people are going to have. That's a lot of sheep, okay? And taking care of that went to the Reubenites, as well as the Gadites, but anyway, to the Reubenites, okay, who were the herdsmen of Israel and took care of the cattle and sheep during the Exodus. When they approached the promised land, comma, knowing that they had no inheritance, comma, they asked to stay on the east side of the river where the valleys and the grazing lands were best. This, of course, was best in their mind, but obviously in the Promised Land, they had grazing land as well. Their request was granted, comma, but they had to cross the river and fight along with the other tribes first. So in other words, they couldn't just say, yeah, we're going to stay here. You guys want that part over on the other side of the river, you go over there, be my guest, have fun. Knock yourself out, so to speak. Okay. And so they say, no, you're part of Israel. You're coming over, and you're going to fight with us and get the Promised Land. Not fight with us, fight along with us. Okay, and help us clear the Promised Land of the inhabitants that are currently there. Okay, and then we are going to let you go back over. And that's exactly what happened. Okay. Subpoint C. Being on the east side, comma, these tribes, Reubenites, Gadites, Manasseh, these tribes began to take on the nomadic characteristics of the civilizations next to them. As a result, they were prone to isolation. And we see this when Elijah goes out and, by himself a lot, right? He's out there in that 3.5-year time period. He spends a considerable amount of time by that stream by himself, right? He came out of nowhere, probably by himself, although, like I said, there were indications that he was teaching in that area. Okay, potentially, but he goes off, and in fact, when it's time for his transformation, he keeps trying to get rid of Elisha and say, "Quit following me. I'm going to go away." Right? And Elisha says, "No, you're not. I'm going to follow you." He gets to him, right? He wants to be alone. I just want to be alone. Anyway, as a result, they were prone to isolation, had the ability to travel light, both with respect to water and to food, comma. If you think about the nomadic tribes of the Arabs and the Arabian Nights and things like that, right? They travel with a sack full of dates and a little sack, and a little wineskin of water and a little bit of cheese, and that's it, right? That's kind of what he did. Okay, so prone to isolation, had the ability to travel light, both with respect to water and to food, comma, and had a certain ability for stealth, period. What? Stealth. His mantle was really a cloaking device. No. But no, we see that they're very, very stealthy, very quiet. They're around animals all the time. So you understand when you're around animals all the time, you tend to be very calm. You develop a very calm nature, because if you're not, the animals aren't calm. And if you're taking care of millions of animals, right, you learn how to be very calm and very stealthy, right? And we see this when we get into it, we see this, multiple times. When he comes up on Ahab, it's like, where'd you come from, right? And then the same thing when he comes back after the 3.5 years, Obadiah is looking for him, and all of a sudden, poof, he's there. It's like, whoa, where'd you come from, right? You underestimate the sneakiness, right? He comes from stealth. Okay, continue the point. Additionally, the tribe of Reuben is known for a good, strong stature and above normal height. So Elijah was probably rather tall, skinny, and dark. Period. See, the painters of the Renaissance were Italians, and or white guys, right? And they tend to draw everybody as fair-skinned. They weren't fair-skinned. Okay, the people in the Levant were mostly dark, brown. Okay, and so he was probably being outside all the time, which is what we get. He was not unaccustomed to being in the sun, right? So he was probably dark. Okay, he being nomadic, and we see that he's a pretty good sprinter. Okay, he wasn't 300 pounds. He was probably very light. Okay, and he was above normal stature. Okay, meaning somewhere in the 6 foot, 6'2", 6 foot, area. Not like 6'9" or anything like that, but above normal stature. Back then, people were relatively short anyway. So being 6 to 6'6" was like being very, very tall. Okay. In 2 Kings 1:8, he is referred to as being hairy. Yet there is no direct reference to head, face, or body. It is generally assumed from a doctrinal standpoint that this refers to bodily hair or facial hair. Remember, long hair is not usually, but long hair is not consistent, okay, with proper function, as we know from the New Testament. But the other idea is that the only ones that really had long hair were the Nazarites, who did like Samson, okay, who did a Nazarite oath, and that's why Samson had long hair, okay. If you think about it, it's kind of interesting. They always draw Moses, right, as this guy that has really long flowing hair and a really big full beard, okay. But think about it. Moses was raised in the house of the Pharaoh, right? The pharaohs shaved their heads. They either had them shaved bald or they had that little tuft that comes out, okay, that you see. So the fact that Moses has really long hair would not be consistent with his upbringing, okay. And they always show him that way, like immediately after he realizes that he's not Egyptian. It's like, what? One night he goes to bed and he's got a shaved head. The next night he wakes up and his hair's all the way down to his, to the back of his rear end. Right? Yeah. So Moses probably was bald. Okay. But anyway, doesn't matter, or if it did matter, we would be told. Okay. But in this case, we are told that Elijah was hairy. Now, the reason we're told this, okay, is so that we have the mental picture of this individual, because he is in isolation. Okay. He doesn't appear to have any friends. Okay. He comes out of nowhere. He's dressed kind of strangely. We're going to see this next. Okay, he's dressed kind of strangely. He has no compunction or no what am I trying to say? No filter, if you will, when talking to the king. He's very he's very direct. He says exactly what he means, which in a lot of times is not consistent with anybody around the king, right? They're all talking in tones that says, I don't want to get my head taken off, right? He doesn't care. He comes out. So this whole Harry thing as well just brings you kind of this idea that this is a person who is out of the ordinary, okay, and is recognized immediately as someone different than them, okay? And he is different than them. His name says he's different than them. His name says that God is, that the Jehovah is his God. And these guys are off doing footsies with Baal, right? And so here he is, and he's coming out and he's saying this, and you can imagine this picture of in this high court where everybody's all, perfumed and very well groomed and stuff. Here comes this tall, skinny, dark, hairy guy, okay, with strange clothes. Okay, and that's what we're supposed to get from from this picture. Okay, so subpoint D. In addition to traditional robes, comma, he had two other artifacts or articles. Excuse me. He had two other articles of clothing. To which the Bible refers, colon, a girdle or wide belt. He wasn't wearing Spanx. Okay. A girdle or wide belt, that's 2 Kings 1:8. And a mantle, M-A-N-T-L-E, mantle or cloak. We have a lot of passages on this one, but I'll give you 1 Kings 19:13 and 2 Kings 2:8. Subpoint 1. We see the girdle as a means of providing support while exerting speed in 1 Kings 18:46, comma, where he tightens it before he runs to Jezreel, and that's Jezreel, Jezreel, comma, so we see the girdle as a means of providing support while exerting speed in 1 Kings 18:46, where he tightens it before he runs to Jezreel, comma, outrunning Ahab's chariot on the way, period. Now, this didn't mean that this guy was some kind of flash, okay, and he ran really fast. What we have to realize is back in the day in the chariots, the commander, the king, whoever rode in a chariot, so he didn't have to walk or run, okay. But it wasn't like the chariot like you think of in Ben-Hur, where they're racing around all the time. What they did in a chariot is they could only go as fast as the soldiers that were running beside them, okay. They had the equivalent of a Secret Service. So think of our president riding in a limo, okay, and before, say, President Kennedy, okay, where they're riding around in an open-top limo, right? And you had Secret Service guys that would run along the side, okay, to try and protect the president. Didn't work out so well in some cases, but the idea was the limo didn't go, 40 miles an hour, and these guys had to hoof it that fast, okay? The limo only went as fast as the guys could run, okay? So the chariot was limited by the slowest runner, but nevertheless, what this tells us is that Elijah was faster than their slowest runner, right? He got to Jezreel before the chariot ever made it. Okay, and these were guys that were in really good shape. These are the top-notch soldiers. You didn't have, as the king, you didn't pick the slouches to protect you. Remember, this again is a kingdom where they're whacking people left and right, okay, and knocking each other off. And so the King Ahab, is going to have a pretty good protection force, to make sure that he doesn't get knocked off by someone in the family or someone outside the family. And more than likely, he probably rotates them so that he doesn't get whacked by his own force, because that was another thing that happened, right? Think of Rome. We were talking about that at the break. Think of Rome, right? You had the protectors to the ruler. A lot of times were the ones that helped to get the guy killed. So but anyway. So he's doing this. Now, we could get in, we could spend a lot of time and go into, the doctrine of the girdle. I can tell you a little bit of information about that. But, just let you know, it really is a symbol for support, okay? For just like when we have the suit of armor, okay, you have the girdle that Elijah has that provides a representation of the fact that he had the support of God. Okay, when he goes to do things, he can do it, and he's there. The girdle's mentioned in this case, for example, because the storm was coming. Everything he had just said happened. The steer got burned up, and everything got burned up. And so this was an indication that, yes, he was one of God's prophets, right? And this was a representation. We see it more clearly in the mantle, which we're going to get in number 2. So subpoint 2, the mantle was used in a variety of ways. And symbolized many things. In 1 Kings 19:13, he uses it to hide his face from the Lord, period. This is representative of shame and separation from God, period. He is in a period of self-pity and he knows it. So the idea here is that he's in a cave, right? And he's feeling sorry for himself, and he's gone, and he's saying, okay, God, I'm no better than the people, my forefathers in trying to straighten this country out. Just go ahead and kill me, poor, pitiful me, right? And the Lord does a couple different things to show him, okay? And he ends up coming out of the cave, but he hides his face from the Lord because he's ashamed. When we studied the cosmic system, remember, one of the things that we studied is the fact that if you're a believer, particularly if you're a mature believer, and you start getting into the cosmic system, you understand that what you're doing is wrong. Okay, you may be when you're an immature believer and you don't know sin and you don't know God's plan and you do wrong things, you can do things out of ignorance. But by the time you're a mature believer, there's very little that you're ignorant of. Okay, and so when you do things and you do them wrong, you know you're doing them wrong. You may not admit it to yourself because that's part of the arrogance associated with it. I'm not wrong. Everybody else around me is wrong, right? But he knew he was wrong, okay? And so he was embarrassed to show his face to God. So he protected it with the mantle, as if God couldn't see him, right? Okay, continue the point. Another time, he uses it almost like a staff, comma, really should say at other times, because there's more than one example. But anyway, like a staff, comma, such as in 2 Kings 2:8, where he strikes the waters representative of Moses, period. So we get a tie between Moses and Elijah. And remember, Moses and Elijah are going to come back together as the heralds of the second advent. He uses it, so period, continue the point. He uses it to signify that Elisha, E-L-I-S-H-A, Elisha, will be his successor. In 1 Kings 19:19. And we'll see that, but in that he is looking, he is told to go find Elisha, and he's looking for Elisha, and he sees Elisha out in the field plowing, and what he does is he comes up and he throws the mantle over him, and that's representative, that's symbolic of Elisha being selected as the successor to Elijah, and Elisha recognizes it, okay, and says, okay, I guess I have to go with you. Okay. Made it real easy to understand what your gift was back then. Hey, why are you covering me with this hairy animal skin? Does this mean something? Yeah. Okay. The successor in 1 Kings 19:19. Just one more point. When he is transformed and taken to heaven, comma, it remains for Elisha as a symbol of the double portion, quote, double portion, end quote, of Elijah's spirit that he receives on Elijah's departure. Period. Second Kings 2:9. Compared with 2 Kings 2:14. So as we'll see, Elijah knows that he's going to go to heaven. He knows he's going to be taken, okay? And so he goes and he tries to separate from Elisha. And he tries to do it a couple different times, right? And each time Elisha comes up, catches up to him and basically says, no, I'm not leaving you, right? And every time when they go into a city or whatever, the people in the city will go to Elisha and they'll go, you realize he's going to be taken, don't you? And he's like, yeah, I get it, but I'm not going to leave him. He's my master. I'm not going to leave him, right? And so he ends up following him. And so he is there, okay, when Elijah, okay, is transformed and gets taken, directly to heaven, okay, and he sees, quote, the chariots of fire take him away, okay, and what is left behind is the mantle, okay, because at one point Elijah had asked Elisha what he wanted, okay, before he left, and Elisha said, I'd like to have a double portion of your spirit, okay, and that's what this represents. And so we aren't going to get into Elisha, the history of Elisha, but what happens is Elisha actually ends up getting that, not only getting that double portion, but he ends up getting the respect, getting the notoriety that Elijah never got. Okay, Elijah didn't want it. Elijah understood his, his role, but and Elisha doesn't go for it either. I mean, it's not like he's asking for it, but he ends up getting recognition as being one of the best prophets in the North Kingdom. Okay, and he gets more respect, more recognition than Elijah did. Okay, and that's part of the double portion. Okay. But anyway, they have the mantle. The mantle comes floating back down. It's sort of like if you've ever, I always imagine this, of course, me, I got a head let things in movies, right? To me, this is sort of like in, Back to the Future when the DeLorean's up there, and they're trying to break away and it's stuck and all of a sudden it gets nailed with a bolt of lightning and it takes it into the future, whatever. This little flag comes falling down, that's kind of what we got here. We've got Elijah, he's going away, right? And the mantle essentially comes off, right? And comes back down to the ground. And Elisha now has it. And as a result, again, it carries its symbolism all the way through. Again, it's not only the double portion, but it's a very clear indication that he is now responsible for that ministry. Okay, he's now responsible for taking over the ministry that Elijah had. Okay, and so he is ready. Okay, he doesn't think he's ready, of course, because he doesn't want him to go, right? And then when he goes and he gets the mantle, the first thing Elisha does is he's like, "Oh God, what happened? Why me?" Type of thing. It's like, I'm not ready, and God says, "Yes, you're ready," and off he goes. Okay, so we have this big, hairy, skinny guy wearing a fat belt like nobody's seen before and a mantle, okay? And he's got, hair everywhere and he's looking kind of weird. And that's what we have from him, okay? So subpoint E. The record of his appearance is enough to tell us that it was unusual even at his time and for his tribe and locale. I mean, humans are humans, so not everybody wore the same thing, right? I mean, you had clothing styles that were representative of different tribes and clothing styles that were representative of different locales. It's sort of like, when you run into someone, even someone sometimes, as close to our heritage as someone from England, right? A lot of times you can see someone and go, that person's not American, right? That person's from England, right? They're not, standing out with a neon sign, but their clothes are slightly different. They just, they're a different color, they're a different fit, they're a different thing like that, right? So you had the same kind of thing. You had different locales. People could look around and say, that person's from that tribe, that person's from that tribe, that person's from, that's a Moabite, or that's a, whatever, okay? But here's this guy, and they kind of go like, that guy's a what? What is that guy? He's not wearing anything that's indicative of anything around here, right? And it's because he has been singled out by God to be the prophet to Ahab, okay? And he's gotten his attention, okay? Even at his time for his tribe or locale. Continue the point. This unusual appearance was also in line with his solitary life and his fierce zeal and directness. Remember, what he's wearing is functional too, right? That's the other thing. Okay, nothing for show. You remember, if he's a Reubenite and he's dealing with animals, farmers don't wear stuff that are showy. Farmers wear stuff because it's practical. Okay, Overalls are practical, for example. Jeans are practical. They wear for a long time, right? You know, boots, even though they've become showy, boots are practical. Okay. When I was first started taking care of sheep when I was in 4-H, I didn't have regular cowboy boots. Okay. I ended up, because they were expensive at the time, well, they're still expensive, but anyway, I didn't have cowboy boots. I ended up buying a pair of regular work boots. Okay. With tread. Bad mistake. Okay. I was always taking barbed wire and picking out sheep dung out of my tread. Okay. Cowboy boots are practical because when you're done, you wipe it off on a fence post and you're done. Okay. So those are the kinds of clothes these guys wore, practical clothes. Well, this guy took practical, okay, to the extreme. And again, it's weird, right? But it's weird for a purpose. Okay. It's practical. Okay. So the record of his appearance is enough to tell us that it was unusual even at his time and for his tribe or locale. The unusual appearance was also in line with his solitary life and his fierce zeal and directness. Okay? In other words, one of those guys that didn't care what he looked like. What was important was what he said. Okay? Sort of like, not that I want to compare him to someone like this, but like Einstein, right? Einstein is said to have not worn, you know, I mean, what he wore, he looked like a slob and stuff because he didn't care about what he looked like. It was what he said and what he thought that he wanted people to want, you know, think about. Not what he looked like. No, there's not a comparison, okay? But you get the idea. Okay. So I was in, you know, so it was in line with that. Continue the point. As a communicator, comma, he didn't pull any punches. And he didn't show any fear. Period. He was confident in the Lord. And he obediently gave out the Lord's message. Period. And we'll get a couple phrases that indicate the fact that he had a personal love relationship with the Lord. He understood the Lord. He understood doctrine. He understood information. Okay, he wasn't behind the spiritual 8-ball, obviously. Okay, he understood this information and he understood and had confidence in God. Okay, in our time when we think about it in terms of the motivational virtues and the functional virtues, right? He had the motivational virtues and therefore he had courage towards God. I mean, courage towards man and circumstances because he had confidence in God. Okay, he went out and said, "This is the way it is," right? And he's in this high court where individuals are guarding their speech all the time because they don't want to get killed. Okay, and he comes out and he says it. And that's what made him the right guy to do it. Okay, and so he did it. He didn't pull any punches. We see, and see the unfortunate thing is, we see people pulling punches, communicators that are behind pulpits today that are afraid to say anything. They're afraid to say the black and white of God's word, right? That there are capital crimes. There are things for which the Bible says you should be executed. Adultery, fornication, okay? Homosexuality, the things that we pick on, right? Murder, rape. Those are capital crimes. But people are afraid to say that, okay? Now, does that mean if a homosexual comes in here, we got to, you know, bind him up and kill him or her? No. It's a sin like any other sin. And the society doesn't have that kind of a punishment right now. So if the individual comes in here and wants to learn doctrine, we let them in and we let them learn doctrine. As long as they're functioning properly and getting doctrine and not trying to evangelize a homosexual way or in the process of committing homosexual acts, okay, then it's just like any other sin. But it is a capital crime. We need to know that. And therefore, when you have a practicing homosexual pastor, what? Right? Yeah. No. So Elijah is one of those guys that would go up and say, "You're wrong," right? Instead, we have churches that say, "Woo-hoo, isn't that great? We've got another one in our fold. We've got another church growing, you know, praise be to God, we've got believers coming. No, we don't. We have malfunctioning people, right? So anyway, he's not going to be one of those kinds of guys that's not going to pull punches. Didn't mean to get on sidetrack. Okay. Subpoint F. Elijah was taught and back up. I missed a very important word. I got to get my glasses fixed, I guess. How Elijah was taught about the Lord. And taught doctrine. We do not know, comma, nor does it matter. What we do know is that he was given the information necessary to become mature and that is his status when we are introduced to him. See, so that's another thing, okay, about the Bible. The Bible doesn't give us that information, and so just like the other background information where it doesn't matter, in this case it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how he understood and how he was saved, okay? He was saved just like everybody else, okay? We understand the process, but how he got that information and then how he learned information, we don't know. But it doesn't matter, because what we do know is that he was mature at the time he came. Okay, and we can tell he's matured because of the way he acts. He's not timid. He's not afraid. He has this love relationship. He has this confidence. He has obviously been communicating in the past because he has a very, very polished speech. Okay, he doesn't stutter. He lays the information out clearly. He lays it out so clearly that Jezebel gets frightened, right? She understands what he's saying. Ahab is frightened. He understands. So he didn't obviously stutter or say something that, was innocuous or unclear. They understood. Okay. And his messages, okay, he makes sure they're coming in, and he tells people that they're coming directly from God. Okay. And God's not going to use an immature individual in this role. So we just understand that he's mature, and we don't have to worry about how he got that way. Okay. And so that right now, that's his name and his background. And we're ready for point 3. And point 3 is going to be the scope and content of his ministry. And what I'm going to do in point 3 is go through a little bit of the just very quick points telling us what we're going to go to next, sort of like a government document, if you will. It tells you, this document tells you this. Well, this content is going to tell you what's going to be in the rest of the study. Okay. And there's subpoints all the way to I. Okay, there are only a couple sentences each, so we're not doing paragraphs all the way to I, but it's more than I want to do in the 2 minutes or 5 minutes that we have left. And since I took up 10 minutes longer in the first class, because I didn't end the Elijah part until the very top of the hour, and then we did giving, so and then singing, and so I took your time in the break. I'm going to give you back a couple minutes here, and beginning next week, we'll pick up with point 3, and then point 4, we'll start off with the account that we have in James, which is the first account that we have, and that, of course, is the drought and the woman in Sidon. Okay? So that's where we're going to end. And we will end with a song.